From athletes to authors, entertainers to innovators, we connect with those who help shape our culture. Join us in revealing stories of their lives and backgrounds, their triumphs and tragedies that molded them into who they are today. Authentically off-script and personally illuminating, this is Audibles with Jason Scarborough. This week on Audibles, Dr. Kim Sessums.
So your childhood was different than most. That's where we'll start. For someone you lost both your parents by the time you were 6 years old. So what can you remember about your childhood and describing that time in your life?
You know, Jason, the facts are 1963, August, my dad was a basketball coach at Pillahatchee High School, and he had left Pillahatchee and gone to Hines Community College. And I've always been told by the people that were in his circles, he and Charlie Ward, big buds. Charlie's in the Mississippi Sports Hall of Fame, and he lived in Pillahatchee. And Charlie said, you know, he's going to coach over there, and then he's going to take over the job at Mississippi College, which is where he had played in college. But anyway, he and Charlie were sideline business. They were trying to raise a few Charlotte or Black Angus cattle. And my dad had gotten in a Volkswagen and was going out to the country to look at some cows. And I'm told that I was standing in the kitchen and pitching a fit because he wouldn't let me go with him. And he was crossing Highway 21 on a pickup. He just pulled out in front of a guy in a pickup truck, hit him broadside, threw him out of the car, and killed him instantly. That was August of '63. I don't really remember him. I feel like I remember more about him just because there's so many photos and stories about him. My mother was never in the news or anything, so I have no memory of her. But about 15 months after he died, she passed away of cancer. Didn't know she had cancer. Got sick after he died. Everybody thought it was her nerves or anxiety, and she was really sick. And so when she died, the three of us, and brother Kevin, 2 years older, and sister Carol, 2 years younger, we moved in with my mother's parents on a gravel road in Scott County, Mississippi. Yeah.
So your siblings, you're taken in by your maternal grandparents, and your grandparents, you look back at that story could have gone a different way, but because of your grandparents caring for you and your siblings, your younger sister, older brother, you know, do you ever look back and say, you know, my life, the story could have ended up differently had it not been for your grandparents?
Incredibly different,
Yeah.
For sure, because there were discussions about who's going to take which kid and splitting us up and that sort of thing, and my grandparents said no. And they weren't, they were not educated people. My grandfather ran a hardware store just as an employee. My grandmother worked in a drapery shop, and they said, no, we're going to keep the kids together. So as young kids growing up, we thought of them as parental figures for sure, and it didn't register with me until after I was grown, married, and had children of my own, what they had sacrificed. Because, you know, until you have kids of your own, you realize it is a siege of self-sacrifice. And I mean, what they did was amazing, to have a second family and young kids growing up. And we weren't always easy, you know, we were traumatized kids. And so we got into some trouble and did some crazy stuff, but they were always there, and we always had a place to go, and they always made us feel loved. It was just a different childhood. Different.
Mr. Malcolm and Miss Joyce.
There you go.
How
in the world do you know that?
I do my homework.
You're a research man.
I do my homework. So how would you describe Mr. Malcolm and Miss Joyce? What kind of...
We call them Mom and Pop. And my grandfather, you know, the strange thing, Jason, even though they weren't educated, I am a stickler, and it probably won't come out in this interview. I'll screw it up somewhere, but incorrect verb tenses and grammar errors and things have always bugged me. And part of that is because my grandparents spoke good English. They were not educated, but they raised us. You know, you can learn book knowledge, and then you have practical knowledge about how you speak and who you're around and that sort of thing. And so we were encouraged to get an education. We were encouraged to do well. Some of it was just self-motivation, but my grandfather had survived the Depression. He had a little country store in Harperville, Mississippi. It's still on the map, but there's nothing there. And he had survived the Depression and he lost everything. And so while I was growing up, there were little strange, peculiar things that he would do, like he would hoard things in his closet in his bedroom, things that weren't that important, like thermos bottles, or if he bought a cigarette lighter, he bought 10 of them because there might not be any more. Because he had gone through that episode in the Depression and realized that nothing's a given. And so he was a little paranoid about that. And he was pretty structured and strict. I've got a piece upstairs in the studio here in the gallery upstairs called Letting Go of Fenced Rows, and it's a portrait of him, but it's an abstract piece, and it's about having fences around us to both keep us away from trouble, but in some way it felt very inhibiting at the time that he was trying to not let us grow up and experience life, but he was really trying to protect us. So the piece is about the weird combination of caring enough for your children to protect them, sometimes in oppressive ways, but also giving them enough freedom to break outside the fence and experience life. Yeah, my brother didn't handle it so well. He graduated early from high school, went off to college early, wound up going to Juilliard in New York on a scholarship in theater, and left Mississippi and just has never come back. My sister was an athlete, played basketball at Mississippi College, and she was younger, 2 years younger even than me, and so her trauma was not quite the same, certainly the same as his, and mine was probably a little less than his as well, but I had more than she did. Hers was just a void in time. She didn't remember the parents, she didn't know anything about them. But 3 kids all wound up being creative in different sort of ways.
You talk about being creative. You guys would, your brother Kevin would write out these plays. Yeah. And then you guys would act them out. So I'm assuming your grandparents were the audience, right?
Well, it didn't matter. We would get on the picnic table out in the yard, and we had a very bizarre. I don't really know how to explain it. When I say gravel road, I'm talking a dirt road in the country. Mm-hmm. Now, we had running water, but it had a lot of red sand in it. But anyway, Kevin has always been not only creative, but very expressive. And he would write the plays, but he would write poetry. He was listening to all sorts of different music from what other people were listening to. I mean, I grew up not realizing it was weird for a 13-year-old kid in Mississippi to be listening to the soundtrack of Cabaret. And I didn't think it was weird personally, but one year I've used my creative talents and started doing handmade liquid embroidery t-shirts, and I'd sell them for $10 a piece, and try to make some money. But one day I showed up to school and I had the cover image of Bette Midler on the Divine Miss M album, and it was Bette Midler with the big red hair. And I got the strangest looks from the people at school because the kids had no idea who she was. Right. But some of the teachers knew, and they were like, "What are you doing wearing Bette Midler on your T-shirt?" And I was starting on the basketball team, Just weird.
Yeah, you described how some people would look at you, and you were quoted as saying sometimes they would stare at you like little exotic orphan kids living with their grandparents. And do you think that played a part in... Did it fuel you any to succeed like you have in your life? Did that play a part in it, or did you brush it aside? How did you digest that?
Personally, I recognized that we were treated a little differently. It felt a little, it was very kind people. You would not know as a 10 or a 12-year-old kid how adults viewed you and the circumstances, since you were not an adult and you could not imagine the trauma of a family in a community where both parents die, you have 3 children left. It was traumatic for everybody. Mm-hmm. And so when they would see us, you could feel that sense of being a little bit different or other than those around you. We didn't know exactly why, or maybe we did, but it was all internalized. And so as I got older and looked back on it, I began to see then the reason people would not talk about my parents. I would ask questions, and I couldn't get anybody to talk about them. And for them, it was traumatic because I'm sure if they had to try to, you'd want to know, hey, what was my dad actually like? And I never could get anybody to tell the stories because those who knew him well were so traumatized by it, they would get choked up, and then you'd feel bad about asking the question. And I wish to this day, a lot of that generation's gone. The guys that, Denver Bracken that he played with at East Central Community College, and then Denver was an All-American at Ole Miss. He was around when I was growing up, but the only thing he ever said to me is, my boy's your age, and he wants to be a great basketball player too, but y'all need to realize you're not going to ever be as good as we were. Well, he didn't mean it in a cocky way. He was saying we were special, we were different, and you guys are probably not going to get there. But he wouldn't tell me any stories. I wanted some anecdotal story about the relationship and what these people were like, and we just couldn't get them to talk about it.
Don't go anywhere. Audibles returns in a moment here on the Spirit Media Network.
During times of uncertainty, it's comforting to know we have a healthcare system in our community that's been committed to supporting us for well over a century. In this current time, we are standing together, and our bond is stronger than ever. KDMC, caring for our community like no one else can.
At Ag Up, your local John Deere dealer, you can leave it up to us, or you can build it, price it, and own it with a simple click of a button at agup.com. Build it. Select from tractors, lawn equipment, or gators. Next, choose which implements and attachments best fit your tasks. Price it. Receive immediate pricing. Own it. Pick it up at your Ag Up location. Visit agup.com today to begin customizing your equipment, or feel free to leave it up to us and visit any of our 16 locations in Mississippi and Arkansas.
When it comes to cooking meals, drying clothes, heating water, and my home, nothing beats natural gas from CenterPoint Energy. It's my most affordable energy option. It costs less to use than electricity, propane, and heating oil. So if you already have natural gas, keep it. If you're replacing an appliance, choose it. Natural gas, your best choice. Safe and affordable, rest assured.
For more on the benefits of a natural gas home, visit centerpointenergy.com/natural gas benefits. CenterPoint Energy, always there.
The Spirit Media Network is providing coverage of sports, faith, and entertainment like no one else in Mississippi and the Deep South. No other media outlet touches all the bases as we do, from the Friday Night Lights to rubbing shoulders with the biggest names in college athletics. Be sure to follow us on our multiple platforms, including Facebook, Twitter, our YouTube channel, and by downloading our Roku/Smart TV channel, Spirit Live. Check out our website at spiritmedianet.com for upcoming projects and broadcasts, and stay up to date with what's happening on the Spirit Media Network, where we're changing the game.
So who was better at catching catfish and picking butter beans? Was it you, Kevin, or Carol?
That's interesting.
Who was better?
My grandfather was a master gardener. vegetable gardener. He was inventive. He came up with an irrigation system, so he didn't just go out there and water. I think he figured out artificial irrigation before it was really a thing. And today, as my wife says, I'd love to have those butter beans and those string beans and that corn and all that stuff that he grew. But at the time, I was a kid and I didn't want to work in the garden. Mm-hmm. Kevin would feign he was having a weak spell, and he'd go in the house and he just couldn't do it. Carol was a little girl. She got away with stuff. So I suppose I probably did a little bit more of that, but to be truly honest, by the time we were in junior high, we were involved in good things. We weren't really getting in trouble or anything, but we didn't have a lot of time to be helping around with the garden, which, looking back, was a shame that we didn't pay more attention to the things that they needed us to do. But none of us were great gardeners. We did shell butter beans a lot. You know what I'm talking about?
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Your thumbs give out, but it'd be big bowls of this stuff, and shelling butter beans and snapping green beans and doing all that stuff.
You read my mind.
Yeah.
I was just about to talk about, I remember shelling butter beans, green beans, in an old wooden swing with my grandmother. So do you think some of these kids nowadays can learn something from the patience that comes with shelling butter beans and green beans?
Discipline. No. Hey.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, along those lines, and it kind of plays into what we're talking about, is we really didn't have very many material blessings, shall we say. I mean, we were taken care of, and we didn't go without food, but we were certainly lower socioeconomic. I mean, we really weren't even in the middle class, and we were living on, the kids, of course, were getting Social Security because the parents were dead, but it was, I would save up for 3 months to buy a record album. You know, it was that sort of thing. But one of the things that happens when you don't have things thrown at you, of course, there were no video games. You could maybe get 2 stations on the rabbit ears on the TV. So we had a lot of downtime, a lot of dead time to either entertain yourself or go crazy. I remember 96 or so, when I first started sculpting, I had the opportunity to go up and visit with Andrew Wyeth up in Pennsylvania, the great American painter. And Mr. Wyeth, he should call me Andy. And so Andy said to me, you know, tell me about your childhood. And we talked a little bit about this trauma, and he had some trauma in his childhood. And he turned around and said, I truly believe that childhood trauma leads to tremendous creativity or psychosis. Sometimes it leads to both. And I thought, this is getting weird. But I think he was right, that childhood trauma can lead to creativity, because you're trying to figure out how to express what's going on inside you in a productive way of some sort, or it comes out in negative ways. And we entertained ourselves. You know, we created things. We created whole worlds with our Matchbox toys and stuff, you know, going through the grass. And I was actually using Play-Doh. Never knew I was ever going to really sculpt and cast in bronze, but I would use Play-Doh and make these figures, even as a little kid. I thought it was very natural to do, but looking back, I'm not sure everybody was doing that. I don't know where it came from.
The experiences you had, it led to, and I wanted to ask you about this piece, because you were quoted, I read a piece on you that talked about the piece at the Vicksburg National Military Park. It was commissioned. And that piece, it came from an experience, your experiences led you to create this piece. And I was curious, what did you pull from, what moved you to create that piece at the park? What all went into that?
This was 2001 or so. There was an article in the Clarion Ledger entitled African American Monument to be erected in the Vicksburg National Military Park. And first of all, I thought that was a very strange headline. Mm-hmm. And secondly, at that stage in my life, for some reason, and I had not really dug down to figure this out, I don't know why it is, part of it was my interest in Andrew Wyeth's work of the African American figure. I was intrigued by the way he portrayed those neighbors of his. I was also intrigued by black and white photography of the African American subject. Eudora Welty's One Time, One Place was a big influence. And so I began to not only study that subject matter, both the subject of who was portrayed, but also just the different medium, photography, painting, sculpture, drawing, whatever, of the black figure in American art or world art. And I saw that headline, and I was already beginning to sculpt, and I thought, man, I gotta check this out. So I read the article. Turns out there was a man named Robert Walker, who was the Vicksburg mayor at the time, the first African American mayor of Vicksburg, Mississippi. And he was an historian, and he knew a lot about the Civil War and a lot about the Vicksburg campaign. A genuine guy, really smart, wound up working at Jackson State in the administrative offices for the president. And at one time, I think, was an assistant to the mayor of Jackson. But anyway, Robert had a passion to see a monument in honor of the 1st and 3rd Infantry Regiments of African descent. And they were black troops from the Union Army who fought at Milliken's Bend, and they were part of the siege of Vicksburg. And Robert wanted to see a sculpture executed to portray this in the state of Mississippi, okay, in Mississippi now, in the Vicksburg Military Park. Turns out there were no black figures in any of the military parks anywhere in the country. This would be the first one. Why? Hey, why not? Why wouldn't I research that and start doing some models of it and some studies of it? While I was doing that, Robert got wind from Elbert Hilliard, who was the director of the Archives and History Department in Jackson. And Elbert had known my dad as a basketball player back in the 50s. And so I went and talked to Elbert about the project. He mostly talked about my dad's playing days at the time, but I showed him my models, my drawings, my sketches, my design, and most of all, I showed him about a 20-page essay I had written about the subject. I had researched it. I was just bathing in this. He said, "You need to talk to Robert Walker." I said, "Who's that?" And he said, "Well, he's the chairman of the committee." Well, Robert, an African-American man doing an African-American sculpture in the Vicksburg Park, sure, he's going to hire or commission a white gynecologist in Brookhaven, Mississippi to do this piece. That's really going to happen. So Mr. Hilliard says, "I think when he talks to you, he might get a different vision." And so Robert Walker came down to this house here, and he and his wife came down, and he told me later he was coming just as a cursory visit, a polite visit to say we're going to go in a different direction. But he walks into my house, and on the walls are all of these subjects, African American subjects, in a variety of different media. And he had called me on a Friday, and he showed up on Saturday morning. And he walks in the house, and he looks around, and we sit down to have a conversation, and his wife says, "I don't suppose you ran out to Walmart and bought all this art overnight." In other words, she's saying, "Robert, this guy collects African American art. What's that about?" She realized that I didn't put that up there for them, that it was a passion for me. And so he began to ask me questions about my childhood, about why I would be interested in this subject matter. And that's when I began to sort of dig in. That's what your question is. I started to dig in to say, what's this about? Why do I find this interesting? What is it about my personality and my psyche that makes me interested in portraying this? I'm not black. I could never know what it is to be black in Mississippi or in the South because I didn't grow up in that culture, but I grew up tangentially to the culture. My uncle had a farm. There were a lot of African American families that lived on that big cotton farm that he had. It's like a cliche. We thought we were wealthy compared to what they were going through. And so I began to be bothered as an adolescent about my station in life. Why do I have glass on the windows and other people don't? Why do I have indoor plumbing and other people don't? Why is there a white bathroom and a black bathroom? Why is there a white water fountain and a black water fountain? I mean, it's so interesting even now in 2020 talking about this with what's going on in the culture. But it began to be interesting to me to try to figure out how to express my angst and my uncomfortable feeling about this in my form of art. And from early on, I began to draw and paint the black figure. That's why I got interested in this project. And as I researched it, I really got interested in trying to figure out how to portray what Robert was trying to communicate. And he bought into what I was doing. It turned into a national competition at the end after I'd already worked the whole thing up. And they had many submissions, and there wound up being 4 finalists. And the committee selected me to do the piece. And Robert took the heat for that because they wanted him to get a black artist to do it. And he said, you know, I can just get a black artist because it's a black artist. But the truth is, and this is so insightful, he said the thing this is portraying and celebrating is the opportunity as a result of this Civil War in America for people of the African American race or of black culture to just have an opportunity to show what they can do, just to have a chance. And he said, if I deny this artist the chance to do this piece and to do it better than anybody else can do it, simply because he's white, then I'm doing the very thing that I'm trying to celebrate is changing in the country. And that was a big statement, to let me do it, you know, to have me do it, and to trust me to be able to do it. And so that we became friends, and he's come down on other occasions to speak down here for other functions that we've had because I respect him enough, you know, to say, hey, I want to hear what Robert has to say about this.
Don't go anywhere. Audibles returns in a moment here on the Spirit Media Network.
You often hear about Mississippi's best kept secrets. If you're looking for the perfect place for your next weekend getaway or the just right setting for your wedding reception, look no further than the best kept secret in Mississippi, the Cart Barn Inn. The Cart Barn Inn is tucked away in Bruce, Mississippi, less than 30 minutes from Oxford, and is a full-service bed and breakfast. Each room at the Cart Barn Inn is fully furnished, including including flat screen TVs, microwaves, refrigerators, wireless internet, comfortable seating areas, and docking stations for your smartphones just in case you forgot your charger. Enjoy breakfast in the morning or a nice evening walk in our privately fenced-in courtyard. Enjoy the game outside on our patio area or take a walk on our boardwalk to our private gazebo. Kay Tyler and her staff will meet every expectation during your stay. Call and book your reservation today at 662-983-7829 or log on to cartbarninn.com. Cart Barn Inn, the best kept secret in Mississippi.
King's Daughters Medical Center and Brookhaven Urology are pleased to announce the addition of Dr. Joel Duff to their medical staff. Dr. Duff specializes in general urology, kidney stones, men's and women's urological health, and diagnosing and treating urologic cancers. Don't let these health issues restrict your lifestyle and keep you from enjoying life with your family and friends. Dr. Duff and the staff at Brookhaven Urology are here to serve your needs. To make your appointment, call 601-833-5713 today.
At Ag Up, your local John Deere dealer, you can leave it up to us, or you can build it, price it, and own it with a simple click of a button at agup.com. Build it. Select from tractors, lawn equipment, or gators. Next, choose which implements and attachments best fit your tasks. Price it. Receive immediate pricing. Own it. Pick it up at your Ag Up location. Visit agup.com today to begin customizing your equipment, or feel free to leave it up to us and visit any of our 16 locations in Mississippi and Arkansas.
Behind every good man, they say, there's a good woman. So you married your high school sweetheart. When did you know she was the one?
Well, in the second grade,
Oh.
I was going out to the playground and I saw Christy Walsh, and she's always been a small person. Her dad was a small stature man, big heart, big accomplishment, great guy. And I saw her walking out on the playground, and I said, that's the woman for me. Now, that's an exaggeration. It took me until 10th grade to convince her that I existed, because she was more of a popular kid and sort of in the deal, and I was from the country. But in the 10th grade, maybe the 9th grade, we sort of started going out, and then we dated for a couple of years, and then her senior year, she wanted her freedom, and she did her thing. And then we got back together in college. We got married just as kids. I mean, I was 20, she was 19. Her dad was, he was like, you're going to take care of my girl, right? I said, I'm going to take care of her. And he was great to me. I mean, he gave me the opportunity to really do something with my life, because he helped us, early on, and until I could get through this medicine thing. She understands me. She understands the creative process. She would say she's not creative herself or not artistic, but she can walk out here in the studio and look at something I'm doing, and just like that, she can stop me from wasting a lot of time, because she'll say, that's not working. She doesn't know why it's not working. She just can look at it and say, that's not working. And she'll be right, and I'll be stubborn and for 3 or 4 more days try to fix it, and then I'll go in the house with my tail between my legs and say, baby, you were right. I'm starting over. But it's been a great life, 43 years of marriage, and I would be lost without her. Yeah.
So help me figure this out. So after high school, you walk on at Mississippi State?
Yeah, well, actually what happened was I played high school ball and I was okay. I mean, I thought I was a lot better than I was. You have to look back, in time. But we played in the old Little Dixie Conference back in those days, and played in the old Pearl Gym, and you'd run into the end wall when you shoot a layup. I was good enough to get attention from some small colleges. Kermit Davis kind of looked around. Now, Kermit would have remembered my dad, because Kermit played back with Bailey Howell's era, and my father finished at Mississippi College in 1955, and those guys were there in 58 through 60 or something. So maybe it was just to be a nice guy, but he gave me a look-see, but then didn't offer anything, and he was right, obviously. I was not of that level. But I turned down some scholarship offers, smaller schools, Delta State, Mississippi College, Belhaven College, Millsaps, that sort of thing. And I thought, I'm going to use my art. And so I went up to Mississippi State. They were just starting their architecture program. And they weren't even in the architecture building. They were meeting in the engineering building. And I got in, and I was just an 18-year-old kid. Architecture is an intense program. It's an intense study course. And when you get in right out of high school, you're a little bit unprepared for the intensity of it. And I was still interested in sports. It turns out, ironically, that one of my high school buddies that I'd played with, Dave Marler, had transferred. This is before y'all's time, but Dave Marler was an all-SEC quarterback at Mississippi State, had come from Mississippi College, and he and Marty McDowell played for Coach Tyler. And I wanted to go watch Dave play football. Well, I didn't have time to do architecture and go to the football events. You're saying, wait a minute, you can't go to one game? But the architecture was really tough. And so immature decision, I bail out of architecture. And now I'm stuck at Mississippi State without knowing what I'm going to do. I'm not independently wealthy. I don't have any money backing me up. I really can't be in school unless I've got some kind of plan. So I thought, well, the only other thing I do is play basketball. So I went to see Coach Davis, and this was the Ray White era. Ricky Brown was a freshman. He played for the Golden State Warriors. So he says, well, come on, walk on out here. And so I go walk on, and it was eye-opening because I'm competing with point guards that are 6'5", and I was 6 feet and 165 pounds. But anyway, that's sort of that part of the story. Coach Davis calls me in the office and says, hey, you can play. It's going to be hard to get any playing time up here because this is a tough league. So he calls Charlie Rugg on the phone, and Coach Rugg was at Belhaven and had recruited me anyway. And Coach Davis says, you need to go down there and play. So I didn't have anything else to do. I thought I better do that. So I leave Mississippi State, go to Belhaven. I get there sort of the end. John Brady's on his way out. He'd been a left-handed scorer, and I say this, if he sees this article, this interview, he'll know it's true. John Brady was a cocky dude, but he could shoot the eyes out of it. And of course, he becomes legendary coach at LSU, et cetera. But I stayed there, got involved in I had to do some work to help offset the cost of school because I was on scholarship, but not, you can't just live on that. Mm-hmm. And then we got married sophomore year, and I was working at a hospital as a scrub tech. And I was taking biology classes, and I got interested in it. And I said, man, I think I'm going to go to medical school. And I didn't think I could do basketball and medical school, even though there were a couple of guys on the team that did it. Mm-hmm. I just felt I had to put more effort into the school. And so I quit playing basketball and applied myself and got in medical school, and off we went.
That's a big switch going
big
from
switch.
Basketball.
Look, medical school was easier than architecture school.
Really?
It was a whole different animal. I say that. I was older. By the time I started medical school, I was 22. I still am an amateur architect. I don't have a degree, and I don't have a license to do structural engineering, but I designed this building, and I designed a lot of the buildings downtown in Brookhaven. So I still have my hand in it, and I sometimes wonder, did I make a mistake? Should I have just stayed? But that's not what life gave me.
No, I think you're doing okay. I think you're doing fine. We're here in this beautiful studio of yours here in Brookhaven, and so you enroll in UMC, finished medical school in '84. A residency interview occurs in South Carolina. Something happens to you that sparks something in you.
You've done your research, hadn't you? When you finish medical school, you do something called a residency in some specialty you choose. It could be family medicine, or it could be general surgery, it could be neurosurgery. Well, I wanted to do OBGYN. I like the combination of obstetrical, primary care with the patients, but also you do gynecologic surgery. And so I was traveling around the country interviewing for a spot, and I was in Greenville, South Carolina, and I had grown up. This is, from the time I was 16, I was making art from the time I was a little bitty kid, but about 1975, 76, I got onto this guy, Andrew Wyeth, a painter up in Pennsylvania. Something about his work just really spoke to me, but I'd never seen it in person. I just had books. So I was in between interviews, and I was training for a marathon. I was doing some road running, and so I was out on a run in Greenville, and I passed by the Greenville County Museum of Art. And so I went back the next day and saw an exhibition of Andrew Wyeth's paintings in person. And man, it just set my hair on end. I just called my wife and I said, it's unbelievable, man. This is just crazy. So that set me on a course to keep doing my art. And several years later, I'd moved to Brookhaven. 1996, long turn of events and a set of circumstances. I wind up going up to Chadds Ford, Pennsylvania, and doing a portrait bust of Andrew Wyeth, my hero, the guy that I had just idolized in the art world. And there I am sitting with him in his studio doing his bust, and he invited me. I mean, it was just crazy. It was my partner, Steve Mills, that started my GYN practice with. He saw how excited I was, and he came down to my office and he said, I don't really get it. You are coming, I mean, you're like busting at the seams over this. I don't really get why you're so excited about it. I said, here's the way it is. Jack calls you. That'd be Jack Nicholas. And Jack calls you and says, hey, Steve, I have seen a video of you swinging your 4-iron, and I really like the way you hit the golf ball. But it doesn't stop there. He says, would you meet me over at Augusta, and let's play around together, just me and you. And he said, I got it. He just never realized that's how big a deal it was for me. And he said, I got it. It makes sense to me now. So that, going up to see Mr. Wyeth, that opened up all sorts of art doors for me. I was practicing medicine. I still was doing my drawings, making art, and I'd just been sculpting for a couple of years. Bruce Brady, dear friend of mine from here, who's the sculptor of the Connerly Trophy at the museum, the Sports Museum. Bruce and I were good buds. We would sit on the Trustmark board together. I was drawing. He was over there playing with modeling wax and stuff. He, on the other hand, understood the financial report at Trustmark. I really didn't understand all that business stuff. I think they put me on the board to just talk people into banking there. That's what the whole deal was about. But Bruce said, man, I think you are a sculptor hiding behind your drawings. So I began to sculpt, and a couple of years into it, Mr. Wyeth invited me up there. Shortly thereafter, I was able to do a portrait bust of Billy Graham from life with Dr. Graham and Miss Ruth up in North Carolina. I did a portrait bust of Eudora Welty from life. I did a portrait bust of Sonny Montgomery right after he died, but I wish I could have done it while he was alive, but the people who commissioned me to do it wanted me to do it just from videos and photographs. Those 4 people I just mentioned, Graham, Andrew Wyeth, Eudora Welty, and Sonny Montgomery, all received the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Wow. Those 4, and I did all of their busts. After I had done it, I realized, wait a minute, they all have a similar, the connection between them is they were presented from the President of the United States the Presidential Medal of Freedom.
Who was your first sculpture? Was it
my first sculpture was Zeus, the god Zeus, in the 11th grade at Forest High School in Play-Doh. My first sculpture in oil-based clay of any serious nature was my daughter Joey. I paid her $5 an hour to sit still, and I did a portrait of her head. But I was learning how to do armature structure and build it so that it would hold together. We left to go on a family vacation, came home, and her head had split in half. And so I called my friend Bruce Brady and said, my sculpture's split in half, what have I done wrong? So gradually he began to show me little bits and pieces about the infrastructure of sculpture. Took me to Santa Fe to the foundry, explained the casting process. And then the first legitimate casting that I ever did was Andrew Wyeth, and shortly thereafter Billy Graham and Eudora Welty. Then the first big monument piece was the African American monument at Vicksburg Military Park.
Don't go anywhere. Audibles returns in a moment here on the Spirit Media Network.
I can totally see us cooking in this kitchen.
I can totally see us cooking like pros with natural gas.
Oh, I would love to soak in that tub.
I'd love to save energy and money with a natural gas water heater.
I can imagine cuddling up in here.
Because natural gas heating keeps the house comfortable when we need it.
We have to get this house.
We have to get natural gas.
We're investing in infrastructure to help bring comfort and savings to you. Visit centerpointenergy.com/natural gas benefits. CenterPoint Energy, always there.
The Spirit Media Network is providing coverage of sports, faith, and entertainment like no one else in Mississippi and the Deep South. No other media outlet touches all the bases as we do, from the Friday Night Lights to rubbing shoulders with the biggest names in college athletics. Be sure to follow us on our multiple platforms, including Facebook, Twitter, our YouTube channel, and by downloading our Roku/Smart TV channel, Spirit Live. Check out our website at spiritmedianet.com for upcoming projects and broadcasts, and stay up to date with what's happening on the Spirit Media Network, where we're changing the game.
At Ag Up, your local John Deere dealer, you can leave it up to us, or you can build it, price it, and own it with a simple click of a button at agup.com. Build it. Select from tractors, lawn equipment, or gators. Next, choose which implements and attachments best fit your tasks. Price it. Receive immediate pricing. Own it. Pick it up at your Ag Up location. Visit agup.com today to begin customizing your equipment, or feel free to leave it up to us and visit any of our 16 locations in Mississippi and Arkansas.
During times of uncertainty, it's comforting to know we have a healthcare system in our community that's been committed to supporting us for well over a century. In this current time, we are standing together, and our bond is stronger than ever. KDMC, caring for our community like no one else can.
I'm always curious, just looking at some of the things you've done, researching you, what is that trait or quality that makes you, that draws you to someone to sculpt? Or is there a trait or quality? Is there something you're looking for in somebody that stands out and you go, that's it, that would be an interesting...
All right, I think that applies to all the medium that I work in. You know, I draw with pencil, a graphite pencil, work in watercolor, acrylic painting, oil painting, and then, you know, there's copper plate etching, and then of course you get to the sculpture. The reason I mentioned the different media is to say you can spend a good bit of time in the creative process going down a path, and you might want to be interested in what you're working on if you're going to spend that much time with it. And as I get older, it becomes more and more important because you have limited time left. Hate to be negative about it, but or fatalistic about it, but it becomes a reality as you get my age. I've had some heart surgery and that sort of thing. So with sculpture, sometimes it's a commission situation where if you could just sit down and say, I want to pick the top 4 people that I want to sculpt and actually meet and sculpt them from life, without a doubt, Andrew Wyeth would have been at the top of my list just because of how he affected me in terms of my art. Billy Graham was a childhood figure that we all at that time would watch on TV and was sort of an iconic figure in American life. So he was very interesting in terms of spending time with him and having conversations. Eudora Welty had been an influence for very intimate personal reasons. Her writings had influenced me, her short story writing, the way she would express herself. She stimulated me to actually write and express my thoughts on the written page. But also, my grandmother that we've talked about earlier, she was dying of pancreatic cancer in a little small hospital in Forest. And I would go over on the weekends when I was in college, right after we got married, and she was going down fast. And I would sit on the hospital floor in the room with her. And my grandfather would get a break and go out to the country to, you know, clean up and come back. And I was sitting on the floor, I'm not making this up, in Lackey Memorial Hospital with my grandmother in her last moments on the floor with a Eudora Welty photography book called One Time, One Place of her works of the WPA in the 1930s. And I was extrapolating from her photos images that I would draw with a pencil because I was so moved by her courage to portray in a published bound book these figures from the rural South that nobody else thought had any value. And she thought they had value because she was recording a time in history and a people who had a certain dignity but had no material wealth or anything of that sort. I'm drawing on the floor, Eudora Welty, black and white pencil, and my grandmother leans her head up and murmurs something, and I walk over to her and she grabs my hand and she takes her last breath and she dies. So 25 years later, I'm sitting in Belhaven in Eudora Welty's den with her, talking to her and moving the clay around, and it's Eudora, the same person who had documented these photographs as I'm sitting on the floor with my grandmother. The weird connections just came full circle, and so there's a lot of intimacy in what I do. A lot of the works you may see in this studio or upstairs in the gallery, some of them are non-objective. They're portraits and they communicate ideas, but they're not literal. Now, some of the works are literal in the terms of I used words and letters to actually make the works of art, because I started thinking, okay, Sessums, you're repeating yourself. I can draw Jason Scarborough sitting there and I can make it look like you. And people will go, oh, how cool that is. It looks like a photograph.
I don't know if anybody's going to think that's cool.
I don't want it to look like a photograph. If I wanted to look like a photograph, I'd take the photograph. I want to capture something about you that a photograph can't capture. But then eventually I started exploring the idea, if I'm passionate about something, let's just use you as an example again. If I wanted to portray you, and the people who knew you, who you really are, would look at the work that I did and say, that's got to be Jason. Could I do it in a way that was not your physical likeness? How would I portray you? Would I use words that you use? Would I use ideas that you have? Would I take things from your past and your history? That's a challenge as an artist to do. And to do that sort of thing, you have to be pretty interested in the topic. You know, it's not just a random, oh, I think I'll do a basketball player. There's an oil painting upstairs of Bill Russell trying to keep Chamberlain from dunking. And it was an old, small, internet black and white photo from inside the Boston Garden, I think. And just a little tiny thing. And I took that and I created an oil painting out of it. Not just because it was Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain. It was 1957. 2 years after my dad had played, and about 5 years before he was killed. It was his era. It was that era. The clothing looked the same. The uniforms looked the same. And the whole time that I painted on that thing for 2 weeks, early in the morning. I come out here from 5 to 7 in the morning and work on that painting. And the whole time, it was really a conversation with my dad that I never had. You know, it was just that sort of intimacy. But it's not a portrait of my father, but it's connected. Does that help answer that question?
It does make sense.
Yeah.
I want to know what the experience was like with Eudora Welty, because she wasn't crazy about another sculptor. She had a bad experience with one, or just one that she wasn't pleased with. So you kind of had to break the ice with her a little bit.
I did. Eudora was a funny woman, and I would not pretend that I knew her well. There was a connection. She was dear friends with another journalist, Jackson Daily News arts editor was Frank Haynes, and he was bludgeoned to death in his home in Jackson. It was a big deal back in the mid-'70s. My brother was renting a room from him. My brother was at Millsaps College. Kevin was at the theater there and was doing some new stage theater, but also working with the Millsaps players. And he rented a room from Frank Haynes, and Frank sort of opened his eyes to a larger art world out there around and helped him actually make his application for Juilliard. Well, Kevin found Frank dead in that house, but during the year that he lived there, Eudora would come over, and sort of that arts intelligentsia of Jackson would get together, and they were artistic, creative, smart, witty, sharp people who would get together in their little grouping and have conversations. And Kevin was a 19-year-old kid who was really out of his element from that same dirt road that I grew up on. But he picked up on their smarts and their savvy and their passion and their compassion, all of that. So one night he was there, and Eudora had a couple too many to drink, and Frank said, "Kevin, would you drive her home?" Well, he had an old white Mercury Comet that had red patent leather interior, and so Miss Welty goes out to get in his car, and he'd been working out that day over at the gym, and he had his gym bag in the passenger side of the front seat. So he opens the door, she gets in, he goes around to the driver's seat, and when he gets in the car, she has retrieved, hanging off the side of his bag, his jock strap. And she said, "What is this apparatus?" And he told me that story, and I've never forgotten it. Well, as I'm sitting in her home there, thinking about that story, I asked her if she remembered Kevin Sessums, and she said he lived in Frank's house. She remembered. She was really, this was three years before she died that I did this. that was part of the story. And then she said, I said, what do you think of this piece? And she said, I thought bronze were for dead people. She was thinking it was an honor, but you don't do it in somebody's lifetime. So that made it she was a little bit apprehensive, but I tried to explain to her how much better it is to do a life bronze of somebody when they're living, so that you can experience their emotion and their way of expressing themselves and all of that. So then she makes the famous quote, not famous, famous to me. I said, what do you think? And she said, well, if I don't know much about bronze, but if you were to ask me about ice cream, I can say without reservation I prefer vanilla over chocolate, or something to that effect. And I was in the room with Helen Barnes, a dear friend of mine who's a GYN surgeon who had bought some of my art and knew Miss Welty. And I turned and looked at Helen, and Helen was just cackling. She was laughing at Eudora's comment.
One of my favorite things in that conversation, I read about you guys going back and forth, and she had asked, how does a doctor find time for this?
Yeah.
Do you remember what you said?
Well, she did ask that question. She said, you're practicing medicine and you're doing this. How in the world do you balance those two? And I said, well, Miss Welty, actually, in the GYN clinic, sometimes patients don't show up for their appointments, and I'll have a little downtime. So I kept your bust in clay in the break room at my clinic, and I worked on you between pap smears. And she looked at me and said, I think we should call the piece Between Paps. And so in my little inner circle, my plaster casting of Eudora that is in my GYN office to this day, when people walk in and say, Eudora Welty, and I say, yes, Between Paps.
Don't go anywhere. Audibles returns in a moment here on the Spirit Media Network.
At Ag Up, your local John Deere dealer, you can leave it up to us, or you can build it, price it, and own it with a simple click of a button at agup.com. Build it. Select from tractors, lawn equipment, or gators. Next, choose which implements and attachments best fit your tasks. Price it. Receive immediate pricing. Own it. Pick it up at your Ag Up location. Visit agup.com today to begin customizing your equipment, or feel free to leave it up to us and visit any of our 16 locations in Mississippi and Arkansas.
When it comes to cooking meals, drying clothes, heating water, and my home, nothing beats natural gas from CenterPoint Energy. It's my most affordable energy option. It costs less to use than electricity, propane, and heating oil. So if you already have natural gas, keep it. If you're replacing an appliance, choose it. Natural gas, your best choice. Safe and affordable, rest assured.
For more on the benefits of a natural gas home, visit centerpointenergy.com/natural gas benefits. CenterPoint Energy, always there.
The Spirit Media Network is providing coverage of sports, faith, and entertainment like no one else in Mississippi and the Deep South. No other media outlet touches all the bases as we do, from the Friday Night Lights to rubbing shoulders with the biggest names in college athletics. Be sure to follow us on our multiple platforms, including Facebook, Twitter, our YouTube channel, and by downloading our Roku/Smart TV channel, Spirit Live. Check out our website at spiritmedianet.com for upcoming projects and broadcasts, and stay up to date with what's happening on the Spirit Media Network, where we're changing the game.
King's Daughters Medical Center and Brookhaven Urology are pleased to announce the addition of Dr. Joel Duff to their medical staff. Dr. Duff specializes in general urology, kidney stones, men's and women's urological health, and diagnosing and treating urologic cancers. Don't let these health issues restrict your lifestyle and keep you from enjoying life with your family and friends. Dr. Duff and the staff at Brookhaven Urology are here to serve your needs. To make your appointment, call 601-833-5713 today.
So funny story happened when you're at Billy Graham's house. So you're getting your sculpting knife together, getting it ready to go, and the bodyguard starts to move forward. Why? Do you remember what happened?
The Billy Graham tale really is unique. Ruth Graham had been dear friends as a child with a lady named Millie Zimmerman, and Millie's son, Rob Oates, was my pastor here in Brookhaven. It's a very small world. Well, Millie was here for her grandson's graduation from Brookhaven High, and Rob called me and said, my mother's bored, she loves art, would you just talk to her, just whatever you want to do. And so he brought her over, and I was in the middle of sculpting Eudora Welty. I had Andrew Wyeth finished, and she looked at those sculptures and her face lit up and she said, "You're the one." I said, "I'm the one." She said, "Can I use your phone?" And so she got on the phone and she calls, and I hear her say, "Ruth?" And I had no idea what she was doing. And she said, "This is Millie." And she said, "Oh, how are you? How's Billy?" And I still don't know what's going on. And so she says, "I have come across this remarkable sculptor, and I think this is the time we need to sneak up on Billy and let's do it. He does beautiful portrait work, and I think he'd be willing to do it." And Christy's looking at me like, "What's going on?" Well, she hangs up the phone and she says, "That was Ruth Graham." I said, "Like Ruth, like Billy Graham?" She said, "Yeah." She said, "Would you be interested in doing Billy Graham's bust?" And I said, "Well, I'll see if I can work it into my schedule." Well, it turns out that they had been talking about it, and Ruth had wanted to preserve sort of his physical. There's been one portrait painted of him, oil portrait, that he approved. Mr. Sandin in New York had done it, and it was up in North Carolina. So that started the process. A year later, she had sent me videos, family photos. I had a whole archive of stuff, and we had decided on doing sort of the mid-70 range. Not the early guy with all the snappy clothes, not the older Billy Graham, but the guy kind of in the middle. And so I worked it up strictly from the photos and the videos. Don't have any measurements. That's where this story comes into play. Calipers are used to measure distances. Lobe of the ear to the tip of the chin. The width of the nares, the width of the eyes. And I just had to guess about how big the guy was. So, as a matter of fact, I was working on it down at the office, again, between patients. And my partner had been to a conference in North Carolina previous year and had seen Billy Graham. And he said, "He's bigger. He's a big guy now. He's like 6'4". He said, "He's bigger than that." So I started making him bigger, just like that. So I finished the piece, and it really looks good. I mean, it looks like him, but I need to go up there. And so I called Ruth. I talked to her on the phone periodically. I said, "Miss Ruth, if I don't come up there and get this thing right, I'm not going to be able to cast it because we don't want it to be almost Billy Graham. Got to be the real thing." She said, "Well, he's home right now." And it was on a Wednesday. I called her and I said, "Well," she said, "he's going to be here this weekend. Could you come up on Saturday?" I said, "I'm not on call. I bet I could make that happen. Are you sure?" And she said, "Yeah." And I said, "Now you're going to tell him." She said, "I'll let him know before you get here." So we hang up and say, we're on the way. So we're driving up to North Carolina, and I got Billy Graham on a platform on the left side of the back seat. I got Eudora Welty on the right side because I want to show her another example of the works. Mm. Well, this truck kept passing me, and he was doing this. "Hey, man, yeah, good." And I thought, what's he? If I have a flat tire, what's going on? Christy said, "He's trying to tell you something." And I go like that back, and I realized he's looking at the two figures in the back seat. He sees these heads. So when I got up there, of course, we drove up to the gate, and she said, "Blow the horn 3 times, we'll open the gate." And they had fenced in this beautiful log cabin up on the mountain. Get up there, and this guy Mike comes out, and he's the bodyguard, and he's there all the time, and he introduces himself, and he said, "Dr. Graham's pretty feeble, so get what you need done. You need to go ahead and get it done." And so we go. I take all my stuff in the house. Miss Graham comes to the kitchen in her house coat, and I set up on a sculpture stand this head of Billy Graham, and then I put Eudora over on the breakfast table. And so she comes in and she sees it and she starts giggling. Her sister was there from California, and they start looking at it, and it's just remarkable. Look, it's him. It's just he could speak. So I'm thinking this is a good sign. So they take Christy off and take her through the house to show her the house. And Billy comes walking down the hall shuffling. He's got on his blue jean jacket that Johnny Cash gave him. He was so proud of it. And he walks in and he looks at it, and then he looks at me like, what in the world is going on? And so I said, "Dr. Graham, that your wife put me up to this, but as long as it's going to get done, let's do it right." And he said, "Well, what do you need to do?" And I said, "I need to do some measurements." So he sits down in front of the fireplace, and I've got the sculpture there, and I get out my calipers, and I get out this steak knife that my grandfather had given me. He didn't give it to me. I got it after he died, and it's perfect for doing slicing anatomy. Like if you want to take an ear off, instead of recreating the ear in clay, if you slice it off next to the head, you can move it to a new spot on the head if you have to. Well, I wasn't planning on doing any of that, but as I measured Dr. Graham, his eyes were perfect distance apart. It was incredible. It was all luck or providence. I don't know what you would say. The eyes were right. The width of the head was right. But when I turned to the side, the length of the ears was right, but the ear was sitting too far back on the head. It needed to come forward just a little bit. So I pull out this knife and I say, Dr. Graham, I'm going to have to move your ears. And so I turned back to get some clay, and I heard everybody start laughing. And when I turned back to him, he had put his hands over his ears as though to say, you're not cutting my ears off. And then I realized he was joking around with me, and that really lightened the atmosphere at that point. So then they left us alone, and I worked for a couple, 3 hours, just the two of us, having a conversation. It was really kind of sweet. I mean, the guy's known by everybody over the entire world, but when it just comes right down to it, he was an 80-year-old man that was in his log cabin on top of the mountain in North Carolina.
I can't tell you how hard I laughed at that. When I first read it, I laughed and laughed and laughed at that. I said, I can't wait to ask Dr. Sessums about that. So you've been involved in sports, obviously, the Kent Hull Trophy.
Yep.
Kent Hull is one of my favorite guys of all time. There's this big 6-foot statue of Johnny Vaught up at Ole Miss, Boo Ferris. I mean, you've been involved with a lot of different pieces involving sports figures. When you're preparing to do a piece of someone, an athlete or a coach, is it a different preparation than it is for, say, a reverend or an artist, or is the preparation pretty much the same?
Good question. Yes, the preparation's important. Typically, these sports figures that are being honored are well known enough that you're going to have to get a likeness pretty good. Now the question becomes, how are you going to portray it? What's the composition going to be? A figure like Johnny Vaught was a little bit intimidating because the stadium's named after him. A lot of the guys that played for him were still alive. Wanted a lot of input into it. We had to pick a kind of a time frame of how are we going to capture him. They wanted to do him with a fedora on. Decided to do that great pose of him on one knee with a football in his hand. I'd kind of wanted to do him like in the middle of a game action on the sidelines with it rolled up paper in his hand or something, but they said, no, let's do a little bit more of the pose. And so researched a lot about Coach Vaught. Unfortunately, I had proposed this before he died, and they just didn't see doing it at that time, so we wound up having to do it from photographs. But I was able to get some of that greatest generation, as they would think of themselves, to come down here to Brookhaven and go over some details about the piece. And ironically, the biggest controversy was what shoes to put on him. And the story was so interesting. I had on the maquette, which is the smaller version that you do first to make sure everybody approves it and say, yes, this is it. Now we're going to do it 4 times that big. I had a pair of Oxford Brogan lace-up shoes on him, and they looked great in the sculpture. I mean, they're just good to sculpt. Some things are artistically better than other things. Mm-hmm. Well, the guys, and more than one of them, said, no. Coach Vaught, man, you got to have those alligator loafers on him. Alligator loafers. And I thought, alligator loafers? I couldn't find a picture with him with alligator loafers. And then Catfish Hunter, who was from this area, had played in for Coach Vaught. He said, look, man, you got to understand something. When we finished playing, some of us went off and played in the pros, and we made a little money. We'd come back to campus, and we'd go by and see Coach Vaught. Well, Coach Vaught had those alligator shoes, and they were expensive, and they were special, and they were him. They were a sign that you had made it. And so he said, I got my first pair of alligator shoes, and I went in there and sat down in that office and propped my feet up on that desk. And he said, Catfish, get your feet off my desk. He said, I wanted Coach Vaught to know that I had alligator shoes. So, of course, on the monument, I have to put alligator loafers on him. And if you go up there, next time you're in Oxford, go by there and see it. Don't think those alligator loafers came easy. They were difficult to do. They look great on the monument. I still think the Brogans would have been a nicer look, but that's what they wanted to use. Yeah, it was interesting, and everybody wanted input into what it was going to look like. But I did the research, and that's what we came up with. So some of the other guys, Boo Ferris, great. What a great guy. Mm-hmm. the first piece I did of Coach Ferris was for the Sports Hall of Fame for the Baseball Player of the Year. And he wanted to do the 1945 image of him on the mound for the Red Sox. And met with him. He was still in pretty good health, he and his wife. And so we had a great conversation. Coach Ferris, if you don't, I know you probably know this, but he never met a person that after he met them, he didn't have this special way of making you feel like you were his best friend. And he did it with me. I love the story. I had done the portrait of him, and he really liked it, and we hit it off. A year after that, after I did it, my youngest son, who was a pretty good high school football player, he was the Clarion Ledger Player of the Week one week, and had his picture, and they put his stats in there. Not that many people see that, but guys that like sports see it. And nobody, of course, knows who he is, and he wasn't like he was a big recruit or anything. So on Monday, my phone rings at my clinic, back when we had landlines, and we had an overhead intercom system. And I hear Dr. Sessums, Coach Ferris, on line 2. So I picked up the phone. I said, Coach, long time no see. Are you okay? What's going on? Y'all need another casting? What's happening? He said, no, everything's good. Everything's good. How about my man, Price Sessums? I said, Coach, what you talking about? He said, Player of the Week. And I said, Coach, you're so sweet to call. He said, well, why wouldn't I call? And I hung up the phone after I talked to him. I called my wife and I said, just got a call from Boo Ferris congratulating me on Price's Player of the Week. Who is this guy? What makes him tick? So I told that story to several guys that knew Coach Ferris and knew of the Delta State connections, Rick Cleveland being one of them. And Rick said, that is a story told thousands of times. He had a way. I don't know how he kept up with everything, but if he ever found anything special to you, he would hone in on that, and he could make you think that your life made a difference and your family made a difference, and they were important to him, and they were important to him. But how many guys can do that? So at the funeral, of course, those stories are over and over and over about Coach Ferris, about how he knew all of the players that ever played. He knew their families. He knew their children. Well, years go by, 10 or 11 years go by, and they decide they're going to redo the stadium at Delta State. But outside the stadium, they want an over-life-size Boo Ferris. Not the 1945 image. They want the 1963 Coach Ferris with the baggy, still the baggy pants, still the leather spiked shoes, still the stockings. But he's coaching on third base, and he's encouraging a batter at the plate. Come on, let's go. We need a hit right here. And so we did him, and that's the piece sitting right in there in the other room, over life-size doing that. I was not the sculptor that they were going to commission to do the piece, but Coach Ferris, and I was told this by his wife, did not really want the other sculptor to do the piece, was not very excited about it, and had said he just didn't want to do it at all. He would never say anything ugly about anybody. But he told his wife, if Sessums will do it, I'll do it. And so she called me and said, would you please do it? Well, they didn't really have the usual funds to do a piece that size, but my wife looked at me and said, Boo asked you to do it, you got to do it. So we did the piece. It was great fun working on it. He had really gotten feeble. He survived long enough to see it installed, and the following year, I believe, he passed away. Yeah.
Don't go anywhere. Audibles returns in a moment here on the Spirit Media Network.
I can totally see us cooking in this kitchen.
I can totally see us cooking like pros with natural gas.
Oh, I would love to soak in that tub.
I'd love to save energy and money with a natural gas water heater.
I can imagine cuddling up in here.
Because natural gas heating keeps the house comfortable when we need it.
We have to get this house.
We have to get natural gas.
We're investing in infrastructure to help bring comfort and savings to you. Visit centerpointenergy.com/natural gas benefits. CenterPoint Energy, always there.
The Spirit Media Network is providing coverage of sports, faith, and entertainment like no one else in Mississippi and the Deep South. No other media outlet touches all the bases as we do, from the Friday Night Lights to rubbing shoulders with the biggest names in college athletics. Be sure to follow us on our multiple platforms, including Facebook, Twitter, our YouTube channel, and by downloading our Roku/Smart TV channel, Spirit Live. Check out our website at spiritmedianet.com for upcoming projects and broadcasts, and stay up to date with what's happening on the Spirit Media Network. where we're changing the game.
At Ag Up, your local John Deere dealer, you can leave it up to us, or you can build it, price it, and own it with a simple click of a button at agup.com. Build it. Select from tractors, lawn equipment, or gators. Next, choose which implements and attachments best fit your tasks. Price it. Receive immediate pricing. Own it. Pick it up at your Ag Up location. Visit agup.com today to begin customizing your equipment, or feel free to leave it up to us and visit any of our 16 locations in Mississippi and Arkansas.
During times of uncertainty, it's comforting to know we have a healthcare system in our community that's been committed to supporting us for well over a century. In this current time, we are standing together, and our bond is stronger than ever. KDMC, caring for our community like no one else can.
Few clients include, I'm going to read this off, people love when I do this, a Pulitzer Prize winning author, a renowned American painter, a world-famous evangelist, numerous elite sports figures, the National Park Service, dozens more that are far too many to count. Is there one on Dr. Sessums' bucket list? Do you have somebody on your bucket list that you would like to either paint or sculpt? Is there somebody, like if you could choose anybody right now, who would it be?
Wow, you know, nobody's ever asked me that. Well, I got to tell you, we can't go too far into this. I'm just finishing. You know, your favorite project's the one you're doing right now, but I will at least give you a little teaser. I am doing a project for the University of Mississippi, and it has been right in my wheelhouse. It's basketball. It's the African-American figure. It's historically significant because of the generation 1970, 50 years ago. The first black scholarship athlete at Ole Miss. Everybody's going to say Ben Williams. It was Coolidge Ball, Indianola Gentry, basketball. Great guy, still alive, 70 years old, lives in Oxford. So we're doing that piece to go outside the stadium, and that's between the stadium and the pavilion. That's been a really fun piece to do, and I would have picked that as a really fun project to do had it not been presented to me. Beyond that, I don't have a bucket list of saying, gee, I wish somebody would call me and ask me to do this piece. So I don't think I can tell you. I'm interested in, I've had so many phone calls over the years about interest and curiosity that never comes to fruition because it usually comes down to money. They're very expensive to cast. It's an involved process. It's not just, whip it out in the studio and it's done, but there have been all sorts of interesting possibilities that just didn't happen. But slowly but surely, as we've talked about even with Audibles, as the name gets out there and projects come up, people call you and say, hey, would you be interested in considering this project? So I'm open to all of that, but I don't have time to do everything I'm asked to do, that's for sure.
Your friend and mentor, Helen Barnes, she said she sees compassion in your art. So what do you think when you hear that she was quoted as saying that?
Well, I love Helen Barnes, and she taught me from an early age. Before I got into medicine, before I went to medical school, I knew Helen Barnes. She collected art. She's feeble now, she's getting older, but she has a wonderful art collection, and she's always been encouraging and supportive of the arts in Mississippi. Helen was interested in my art before I ever became a physician, but after I finished medical school, decided to do OBGYN. She taught me about not just compassion for others that maybe are in difficult circumstances. Her story is incredible. She would be an amazing interview for you. And it's something you really ought to think about doing, because I think Audibles is probably going to become bigger than just sports in Mississippi. Helen Barnes is a groundbreaking figure in the history of medicine in the state of Mississippi, not only because she's African American, because she's female, and she came here at a time where there weren't that many female physicians, and there certainly weren't black female physicians, and she had to wear a white coat around when she got here, because otherwise she was stopped and asked, what are you doing in this building or that facility or whatever, because people were suspicious of her because she was a black female and she was very independent. But she didn't get bitter about it. I love the story of Helen Barnes at the University Medical Center, walking down the hallway on the postpartum floor. After a woman delivers, they go to the floor to spend the night. And a woman, there was a mess spilled all over the floor, and a medical student walked out in the hall and saw Helen, didn't know her, and assumed she was one of the support help, and said, would you come in here and clean this mess up? Well, she was on staff. And poor guy, I'm sure he wanted to crawl under the door when he figured out what was going on. So in a few minutes, she walks through the door with 2 mops and a mop bucket. And she hands him a mop, and she takes a mop, and she says, why don't we clean it up together? And he looks at her coat, and it says, Dr. Helen Barnes, OBGYN staff. She didn't berate him. She didn't humiliate him. She didn't kick him out of the school. But she taught him that day that he wasn't above cleaning up the mess on the floor. So I love that story about her. Helen is very sweet to say that my work has compassion in it, and she's never actually said that to me to my face, but she loves my work. I think she loves me as a person, and she knows that I love her. I did a show, a one-man show at Tupelo Museum one time. Tupelo's kind of one of those destination spots. You got to be wanting to go by there to get there. And I didn't think anybody would show up, and it was, I did it for a friend of mine who was connected to the museum. And in through the door walked Helen Barnes. She'd driven up there by herself because it was my show. And I said, Helen, you shouldn't have come. She said, I wouldn't miss this for the world. Wow. A little bit like Boo Ferris, but Helen's a dear friend. And I hope that what people see is not only compassion, but I hope they see the passion of somebody spent time on this. Andrew Wyeth told me when I asked him, Walker Hancock was the head of the sculpture department at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, of all things. I mean, a legend in the sculpture world. He had tried to do a portrait of Andrew Wyeth back in the 60s, and it never happened. And I asked Andy about it, and I knew the story, and he said, it was just an artist making a piece of art, but this work that you're doing has bite to it. And he meant that in a positive way, and I thought, okay, my work has bite. Andy says my work has bite. So he was saying to me, you're not just doing a piece of art. There's something else added to this. There's a passion involved in this, and I hope it comes through in the work.
Final question. What do you think your parents would think of all you've accomplished? You're an accomplished physician, accomplished artist, a father, a husband, longtime Brookhaven resident. What do you think they would think?
Well, I hope they would be proud in a parental sense, but I mostly think they would be happy that I was fortunate enough, blessed enough to have a person to spend my life with that I still want to be with. My kids are gone; they're all grown up, but I got my girlfriend back. That's special. And she never got to know them, so that would be special for that to happen. But and the other thing, I think you want your kids to be happy. As your kids are young and they're growing up and you're trying to help them understand about living life, I hate to sound philosophical, and you teach them everything you can teach them, eventually they go out and they're on their own and they're going to make mistakes, just like we still make mistakes. But at some point you're an adult and you have to deal with your own problems. I hope they would feel like that I've had a good life and that I enjoy life. I read a quote. I'm doing a new piece of art now that's sports figures, some of the legendary figures, and most of them have won tons of trophies, but I'm combining it with a quote on the same piece of art that says something about, do we worship sports too much? Do we put too much stock in it? What is it that makes it tick? Is it the money? Is it, it's not the money. Bailey Howell right over here, the college player of the year for basketball in Mississippi, signed for an unprecedented $10,000 in 1959 or 1960 with Detroit. Nobody had ever heard of that kind of money. He played because he loved the game. It wasn't because he was making millions of dollars. But I read this quote and it says, trophies tend to collect dust, but memories last forever. The things I'm doing, I'm not doing for trophies. I'm not doing to be on Audibles. I'm doing because I come home from the GYN clinic that I love, and I love what I'm doing for a living. But I love coming out here and making these pieces of art, and every now and then it speaks to somebody else. that's great. I love the fact that somebody else gets something out of it, but truthfully, I love the fact that when I walk into the gallery, somebody said, well, how do you know what you want to create? If I'm not interested in it as a piece of art myself, why would I expect anybody else to be interested in it? So I try to create things that I think I would like to be interacting with, and maybe somebody else out there finds it interesting in their life or helpful in some way.
I got to be honest. I told you this before the interview. I had to dig for this one. I had to work, and I hope that we get to paint your story the way that makes you proud. So thank you for taking some time with us.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks for watching.